Hi, everyone. Welcome to AMCD's Writers Consortium 30-minute community chat on basics of action research. My name is Dr. Shreya Vaishnav, and today we will be covering the components of action research, the use of action research in counselor education, and some implications of using action research within our field. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Mumbai, India, and I migrated here about 11 years ago. So I strongly identify as an immigrant. I completed my master's in clinical mental health counseling at Arizona State University and completed my doctorate in counselor education from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Currently, I am a visiting assistant professor at Palo Alto University. And I am serving as the co-chair for the ACA Graduate Student Committee and the Awards Committee Chair for the Association of Multicultural Counseling and Development. I have led several research projects on the impact of microaggressions on students from marginalized identities. I've facilitated workshops on navigating and responding to microaggressions in academia. Specifically, I've utilized collaborative and action research approaches such as photo voice, to explore issues of equity and inclusion within academia. My research has also focused on effective mentoring practices for students and faculty, strengths-based approaches in working with students from marginalized backgrounds, and social justice advocacy. So I'm really excited to talk to you about action-based research. And in the following slides, we will learn a little bit more about why the need for action-based research has come up so much in education and its roots and what we can do with this. So before we even talk about action-based research, it's important to look at the different research paradigms that researchers have predominantly used in the last how many ever years, right, that research has existed. So we've looked at positivism, post-positivism, critical theory, and others, and constructivism, right? They fall under qualitative approaches and quantitative approaches, with positivism and post-positivism under quantitative, while critical theory, feminist theory, constructivism, all under qualitative. So in terms of all four of these paradigms, they come with their strengths and weaknesses as research methodologies. However, a few things to note with these paradigms are that in all four of these, there's often an unbalanced power that is situated within the researcher, right? The researcher is making decisions on what questions to ask, what data to analyze, and what information to publish. Another huge criticism is that researchers using these methodologies are able to inform future research and practice, but seldom work on impacting policy change and social justice advocacy, right? So often this research is published in our field, but there's very little done to put it into practice, or even if it's put into practice, a lot of times we don't take it any few steps further than that. So with these four paradigms, which have existed in our field and in most fields for years, they work for the most part. However, over the last few years, there's been an identified need to do something more with the research that we do. This is when two researchers, Heron and Reason, argued for a fifth paradigm, which is participatory or collaborative paradigm, which is very much action-based. They felt that the existing paradigms were limited in nature and pushed for participatory paradigm, which is more action-based in nature. So as we look through the participatory paradigm, pay attention to the differences in each of the different aspects or the issue that we explore. So for example, with ontology, which is the nature of being, participatory paradigm looks at subjective and objective reality, both of them, and it's co-created, right? It's co-created not just by participants, but also by the researcher. They're both involved in it equally. In terms of epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge, right? The validity, the scope. Heron on reason note and identify that critical subjectivity is really important in participatory research. The participatory research aspect is experiential, propositional, and really focuses on the practical knowing. The findings are co-created by the researcher and the participants. So this is very unique because in all the other paradigms, often the findings are not co-created. You might include member checking in your process, but it's very, very rare that participants actually come up with the findings in the research. It's usually the researchers who make those decisions, right? The methodology is political participation and collaborative action inquiry. So really, the practical use of this research is important. How are we going to move forward? What kind of methods are we using to collect this data? And how are we using the experiences of participants within our methodology to make sure that each participant voice is meaningful and counted for? And then finally, axiology, which is the value, right? The value of this kind of research is really with the aspect of autonomy, cooperation, and hierarchy in a culture is an end in itself. So that itself is valuable, that we are using our participants as equal partners in the work that we're doing, and that this is important for producing research and the findings because we are using what our participants are giving us, but also having buy-in from them and using their help to come up with the research results. So what exactly is action research, right? We talked a little bit about the participatory paradigm, and action research kind of falls under it. Now, action research was really a methodology that surfaced in response to the growing need for more relevant and practical knowledge in the social sciences. It really bridged the gap between academic research and day-to-day applications. So it's really defined as any systemic inquiry conducted by teachers, administrators, counselors, or others with a vested interest in the teaching and learning process for the purpose of gathering data about how their particular schools operate, how they teach, and how students learn. So you might note that typically action research is really focused or talked about in terms of school settings, teachers, and really within that school environment. In counselor education, we can use the same principles and understand that it's grounded with participatory-based research paradigm to really make a strong research project and create change in our community. So action research consists of these 5 C's, which are really important, which is commitment to the research, collaboration with our participants, the community that we're looking into, expressing concern, right? Having a level of concern and care, having a level of consideration of issues that might come up, or consideration of what it means to be a researcher who's not a part of the community or is a part of the community coming in to conduct this research project. And then change. That's the most important aspect of action research, is creating change through our research, really acting, creating action steps to move forward. And action research can really take place through interviews, focus groups, photographs, right, with photo voice, journaling, observation, survey settings, classroom observations. Those are just a few methods that you could use for action research. So here, the next few slides have a few diagrams of what action research can look like. The first one, this one highlights the action research cycle, right? So you're designing a study, you're collecting data, you're analyzing the data, you're communicating outcomes, and then you're taking action. Based on the action, you will get some more information, and then you design, you redesign, you collect data, you analyze it. It's a cycle where you keep working towards change in the long run. Similarly, folks also describe action research as a spiral, right? It's the look, think, and act spiral. So as researchers, as educators, students, professionals, we're looking for areas where we see there room for improvement. We see that there needs to be change. We're thinking about how to implement this change. We're taking in all the data we can gather, and then we're acting on the information we have. So if we look at it from that perspective, we're not only conducting research, we're not only researchers, but we're also agents of change, agents of transformation. So when we look at research, the research paradigm of participatory-based action research, a few things we want to keep in mind, and I already talked about this a little bit a few slides ago, but really the reality is co-created by participants. We're not making assumptions or concluding based on what we see, but we're really helping or we're really understanding our participants' perspective in this process. Political participation is important in this. This is one paradigm where you can really help create political and social change based on the research that you conduct, right? So this is something that is absolutely essential to keep in mind, is how are we creating change in our system, in the environment, using collaborative action, right? Using the support and help and influence as well as commitment from the shareholders, who are the participants in the community. The quality and goodness of our research is determined by the ability to create this change in policies, social reform, and in agreement among participants, right? When you see that most of your participants agree with the outcome of the research, the findings, you can assess your quality of research based on that. In terms of power, ideally, participants have more power than researchers. And this is intentional, right? Because as researchers, our goal is not to just go in, collect data, analyze it, publish it, and then leave, right? We want to be able to stay and create change. So one way to do that is by really giving participants, the shareholders, the stakeholders, right, who are the ones who are the most impacted by the issue or phenomenon being studied in the community, for them to be able to have that power to really talk about what's going on and their perspective on how things are from looking from the inside out. And then finally, self-reflexivity or critical subjectivity. They're both essential practices that researchers must explore and look into when they are conducting action-based research. So reflexivity is really deconstructing the researcher's authority in the process of research and writing. This requires a level of accountability to participants' narratives. This really involves you looking into the process, right? Reflecting on the interactions you're having with the participants, things that are coming up for you and how they're impacting your work, your research, your writing process. So as we move forward to talk about what action-based research can look like within our field, there have been, photo voice has been a really popular tool that's been used by a lot of researchers, and photo voice is essentially using photos to help communicate and explore themes and issues and phenomena that a community is experiencing. So for example, I use photo voice with my participants in a study that explored the experiences of microaggressions in doctoral programs in counselor education. So the goal was really to help create change within our education system, within academia. And my participants were the ones who brought in pictures based on what really represented their experiences of microaggressions within their academic program. And then we got together, and through focus groups and individual interviews, we talked about these pictures that they brought in. And participants essentially came up with the themes that they felt were really important or coming up for them and their experience of microaggressions within academia. So really, as a researcher, I was more of a collaborative individual who supported and facilitated this conversation, but really let my participants come up with the themes that they were seeing in their experiences of racial microaggressions. So that's one example of action-based research. But the next step of that research with photo voice, right? It's collaborative in nature, but there needs to be that action step. And that action step means reaching to stakeholders, policyholders, reaching to people in positions of power. And one of the ways I've been doing this, and this started as a student, right? So I already recognized I had less power when I was a student, but as faculty, I absolutely have more of a voice and say in how we can support students, especially students from marginalized backgrounds within academia, right? So one of the ways I've been doing this is by really presenting the findings at conferences, hosting workshops within my academic community, within other communities in counselor education, where I really talk about how this is so important and how we can really take this information and take some steps in creating changes within our department. Eventually, my hope is to really get to a place where we can have a more systemic change in the way we run things, right, in academia, where students of color and from marginalized backgrounds don't feel as oppressed in their experiences. So that's one way to do it. A few other studies that come to mind are folks who've used photo voice in their classroom, right? They've engaged with students in particular classes like ethics or multicultural class, and they've asked students to use photos to really explore the process of where they were at the start of class and the change at the end of class. Faculty, teachers, educators, professionals have also used other ways like observations, surveys that have helped them inform their practices moving forward. So they've used the data they've received from their students, from the community, and really taken steps, acted on it, changed their teaching practices, and published that research for others to also be able to learn from. So those are some ways that that come to mind, some examples of how we've done this in counselor education. And I think it's so important that we continue using this method, right? Because this helps create social change, transformative social change that's so important and so required within our field. So when I talk about implications for students, practitioners, and educators, really, this action-based research provides an opportunity to record and reflect a community's voice, right? Where that community is a rural community, in another country from where you live, or whether it's your classroom, right? Or whether it's in your group practice with your clients who come in and see you. It promotes critical dialogue and awareness, right? Not just for the researcher and the participants, but also for those who are consuming this research. It really attempts to reach policymakers to elicit change, right? So when teachers use action research in their work, they are the ones who are also in a way policymakers of their own classroom curriculum, and they can really change that based on the information they gather, the research they conduct. Co-researchers are initiated into the inquiry process, right? So it's really something where instead of just the researchers being the inquirers, they're a part of it, but the community, the folks, the participants are the ones who have the most say in this. They're the ones who are inquiring about the process and change for themselves and their community. Communities of inquiry are embedded in communities of practice, right? So the questions you're asking as a researcher are questions that are going to give you answers on how to change your practice, how to create change, how to act on this and move forward with this. And this, finally leads to action to transform practices, right? That's what's important as counselor educators, as professionals, as students. We are all committed. We're in this field because we are committed to change, right? And action research is a perfect tool for us to use to be able to commit to this change, and to really use what we see and what we've learned in our process to act and create that change for future students, for future faculty, for counselor educators who are consumers of your research. So, with this being said, a few things that I do want to leave you with, right? Action research can be engaged by anyone, whether it's an individual teacher, a collaborative group of colleagues sharing a common concern, an entire school faculty, right? It can be one person to a group of people. There are multiple approaches of conducting action research. However, what's important to keep in mind is that action research really helps build a reflective practitioner. It helps make progress on the priorities that you have in your education system, in your school, in your practice. And it really helps build professional cultures, right? Because cultures are not stagnant, they keep changing. And for us to assess how things are going, action research is so required in our field. So with that, I'd really like to conclude my presentation with some references. I really appreciated the opportunity to speak on this, and I'm really excited and passionate to talk about photo voice and how that serves as a collaborative action-based research. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me, or you could reach out to the AMCD Consortium writers group, who can answer your questions or guide you to me. But it was really great to talk about this topic, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and week and month and year. And again, feel free to reach out to me via my email if you have any other further questions. Thank you.